Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review A Nightmare on Elm Street. So, my one hesitation about reviewing A Nightmare on Elm Street is simply because I would probably have a lot more logical problems with this movie compared to anything else. Consistently, I would go on and be like, okay, why is he wearing a red and green sweater? Was it Christmas when he died? Like, we don't really have a legitimately fleshed out origin story of this character. Really, we can go on and understand every other slasher character's origin story besides Freddy. People can go on and tell me that the remake has a little bit more of origin story that no, like that's like a little tiny like lead up to what just goes on and is to just lead to the exact same kind of film that this movie does. It doesn't 100% set everything up, and so there's never really going to be a Krueger Begins or a Krueger Rises or something like that, where we see the absolute beginning of this character. And I think that's the one thing that I absolutely want. To really understand the reasoning for this character to eventually be who he is. Because I think in the later movies anyways, we go on and we root for Krueger compared to anybody else. Because really at points where a lot of times just the hero characters are just really interchangeable and nobody really cares about them, to the point where we would just rather root for the villain and see how he is to kill all of these characters off, sadly. Because, yeah, they just... you get too many of these films to where you're like, I don't give a about the hero or the final girl or whatever. Like, whoever the last person standing is, they're probably going to figure out some way to beat them. And they have to get more creative somehow or another, which they really don't in sequels. Or they just, like, reboot the thing so that way they don't have to, like, be all that creative. They can just, oh, we'll reboot? Now we can just start fresh. It's like, ugh, whatever. And they kind of did the same thing with A Nightmare on Elm Street. So... one thing that I have to go on and be like, okay, why does he wear a red and green sweater? And for the life of me, I always thought that green was black. I always thought it was like red and black. I never could really see the green in the red and green sweater. I guess it was never in my mind all that prominent. Or we always had this character in the darkness anyway, so you couldn't really see the green regardless. I never also could not understand the boiler room thing. Oh, well, it looks creepy. Like, there are some people that had to give us reasoning for this character. But I'm like, but I want a book. I want a show. I want a movie that is giving reasoning. Was he a janitor in some iteration? And that's why the boiler room? Well, it's like, that's his place, that's his theme, that's his thing. And I'm like, Elm Street should be his thing. He should be attacking people in a street. Why are they calling it Elm Street then? Why not just call it like Freddy Krueger? Because that would make a lot more sense. They could call it Krueger. That would make a lot more sense than A Nightmare on Elm Street. I'm wondering if they had any working titles for this film instead of just, was it always Nightmare on Elm Street? A Nightmare on Elm Street? Was it always that? I'm sorry. I have too many problems with this film. It doesn't make sense. But anyways, hence why you have generic titles like Friday the 13th or Halloween or to where it doesn't seem like it's stuck to some location and it can be whatever it wants. So, for this film, I would say bizarrely, even though I have problems with it, I still enjoy it. I can go on and say that I can call this a great film, even though I have problems with it. Uh, really, having this character have a lot more fun with its heroes, for its survivors, for its final girls, whatever you want to call them. Because we have all the other slasher characters that are just these slow walking characters that are really just boring and like, I can't wait to just slice somebody. How creative can we just go on and just slice and dice them? Or figure out a way to just kill them because, like, this character has not much beyond that. The thing that I kind of like about Chucky is kind of how he kind of teases people or talks to people before he kills them. And, like, you can't really tell exactly where he is or the exact location of where he is at all times. And where in this movie we of course have Krueger, who is just kind of teasing his characters by like, Tina, how's it going? Tina. Like, he teases his characters before he absolutely kills them. And that's what I can enjoy about this film. But we also have to try and understand several different sequels and iterations of this character about how he goes about his business. Like, we had the one Freddy vs. Jason movie where Freddy goes and slices the girl's nose, and the girl wakes up and her nose is completely fine. But any other time, Freddy would go on and slice somebody, and you would see the mark when they woke up. So, anyways, so for this movie, what is this movie about? So we have Freddy Krueger that is to go on and is to be killed by a number of kids because he had killed supposedly 20 people. Any rando people, I don't know who exactly he killed. He just killed a number of people. Nothing was really explained besides that of what I just said. And so Krueger, instead of deciding to haunt over the people that had put the boot to him by putting ablaze his house, instead of actually going after those exact identical people through their dreams, murdering them, making it so that they don't have a offspring of sorts or a child. No. Freddy Krueger waits 20 years because he's a real anniversary guy for some goofy reason, and is to go after the ancestors or the childs of every one of those parents. Still, just does not really make sense. But then I think later on, Freddy Krueger just becomes that this character needs to spread the lore of him. Once the lore is to be spread about this character, all of a sudden, a number of people start to get killed, a number of people start to die within their dreams. And really, I'm just like, well, why not have just done that right out of the gate? You could have killed all the people that were tied to the original thing of that. And then that could have started the lore of this character. To just be like, hey, you know that guy who killed people in dreams? Yeah, like, I heard he had this, that, yeah, like, let's not hopefully dream about him. And then that would have started the lore. Wham, bam, that would have been done. That would have been a much better retconning if they would have done that, but no, they didn't do that. Anyways, so with that said, we have Freddy that is to go after a number of kids while they're dreaming, of course, through boiler rooms and schools and all kinds of areas, which that kind of does make sense for our characters to have some sense of, oh, I'm not dreaming, until eventually they see some kind of thing that would make them immediately think like, yeah, I'm seeing a dead body just sliding on the floor. I think I might not be awake. This wouldn't make a lot of sense if I just wasn't awake right now. Just seeing this dead body just sliding through the ground. Seeing this hall monitor with a Freddy Krueger looking getup. Yeah, kinda. I'm thinking this is a dream. So yeah, so with that said, we go on. We have a number of characters in this film. So yeah, let's go into it. Let's just go into spoiler time because the movie is to be an hour and 30 minutes. So let's go out of our way to say that it's about that time yet again to go into this thing that is to ultimately be called spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about the time we get to spoil this movie. Really, it was very hard to even get to the cryptic sense of this movie, just because it's like, A, it's a Nightmare on Elm Street. B, it's an hour and 30 minutes, so how vague could I be? And C, really it just kind of goes down to, like, there's a lot of stuff that really isn't explained about this character. It's not an easy tee-up thing to explain the origin, because there isn't really an origin of this character. So, with that said, the very beginning of this film, we of course have a girl named Tina who is dreaming along, and we of course have the whispers of sweet nothings to Tina, consistently Tina. So Tina goes on, and she of course is in this dreaming state, making her way through her house to, or no wait, I think the first iteration of her dreaming, she's in some boiler room where there is Freddy whispering sweet nothings to her, Tina. So we have Tina that, of course, is having these night terrors. And so Tina is to go on and try to figure out where Krueger is. Krueger is to appear from behind her. One interesting thing, Robert Englund was going on and saying that at some point during this franchise, they were possibly thinking about replacing Robert Englund with someone else. I think that was in the sequel film. Tune in to Inside of You with Michael Rosenbaum, because there's a on that YouTube channel. Robert Englund is to go on and talk about Freddy Krueger, and is to kind of mention that he was going to almost get replaced by somebody else. And like, really? Like, you, Robert? Like, they didn't know. Like, they just wanted to just kind of, like, they weren't really sure about this character yet, and they could have thought that they could have easily swapped him out. Kind of look at Jason. How many times did Jason eventually get replaced through a number of different iterations until, like, Kane Hodder, am I saying that right? Kane? Like, he played Jason a lot through the years. So Tina is going on, and Krueger is behind her. All of a sudden, Tina is to wake up because the mother's like, "Hey, you better stop dreaming like that. You better start cutting your nails and stop dreaming like that, Tina." Yeah, I'm sure she's gonna completely be able to figure that out, how to just stop having night terrors or nightmare dreams and whatever. Tina is to find out that she has a slice on her nightgown. And, but I just, like, there's some parts about this movie I just start laughing, just because I'm like, yeah, she's gonna control her dreams. She's gonna wrangle in them nightmares. It's all gonna go away. So Tina goes to shul the next day and is explaining to everybody, yeah, I had this awful nightmare about this red and green sweatered guy, and like I don't know what to do. Like I'm just having these horrible nightmares. And so I guess that's what spreads the lore of all these other people. Because I think Rob is to go on and say that he had the same dream too, that she had. And Nancy is going to start to get this dream also. And also, so is Glenn. Barely, because we never see his dream world. We just see eventually him getting sucked into a mattress at some point. But, anyways, Tina is to have like a really hard time sleeping. And so we just have a number of these characters that go on and are doing a sleepover. And I guess Tina's parents aren't home because they have the sleepover, and we have Glenn, Nancy, and Gina who are there, and all of a sudden Rod arrives later, scaring all three of these characters as he comes to the backyard, and Glenn goes out there, is like, hey, kitty kitty, chow chow. Rod all of a sudden tackles Glenn, and and then Rod, of course, is to be this very mad, aggressive guy, and so when anybody's to give him crap, he all of a sudden has this blade come out. And I'm like, well, yeah, if you're probably thinking anybody would probably go and kill somebody, it would probably be Rod because of his temper and because he has a blade. So I guess since Tina has no parents at home, Rod and Tina take advantage of this. And we have Rod who's grabbing onto Tina. And so we consistently hear both Rod and Tina going at it. And so Glenn is just hearing these screams and words of sorts, and Glenn is just like, oh my god, like he is just so upset, he is just so ticked off, because of course he has to go on and listen to all this, and he's like, well, like morality, this is great. So after both Tina and Rod are finished, let's just say, Rod is to go on to mention that he is to have the exact same dreams that Tina is to have. So Tina is to go on and fall asleep after her exhausting time with Rod. So both of them are sleeping. So Tina is sleeping away. All of a sudden, we have Tina who is like kind of jumbling around in her bed. Rod's like, what the heck is going on? So Rod is to kind of check under the covers. Tina is with Freddy under the covers, but we can't really see that from Rod's perspective. Rod gets out of the bed, and so Tina, of course, is to have her nightie ripped open and ka-slice. All of a sudden, we're starting to have her just kind of being rolled all over the place, all over the walls, over the ceiling. She's bleeding everywhere. Tina makes it onto the bed, and Tina, unfortunately, is dead. We have Tina screaming, we have Rod screaming. Both Glenn and Nancy are like, what the should we do? So, because this door is technically locked from the inside, we don't have Rod who's like, hey, I'm getting out of here because this is cray-cray. So considering the door was locked from the other side, the police were called, and so immediately everybody is just thinking that it's Rod who did this, but Rod is not booked. Rod isn't even caught because Rod gets the F out of there, and so now we have Nancy explaining what had happened. Like, but she couldn't really, like, she just heard what was going on. So Lieutenant Thompson, of course, is talking to Nancy and saying that, well, like some people were saying that both Rod and Tina were having an argument. And Nancy's like, well, yeah, it was an argument, but like it was an argument probably about nothing. Like it was a stupid argument that like really wouldn't escalate to anything. Is what paraphrasing was Nancy was kind of saying. So it's like, well, still an argument. Like this guy's going down. So all of a sudden we have Rod, who at one point is to go and find Nancy and is to try to explain what had all happened. And so while Nancy is going off to school instead of staying home, grieving for the fact of her friend being dead, all of a sudden Lieutenant Thompson is to kind of have his gun out, noticing that Rod is to be there. Nancy is to assume that her own father is using her as bait to try to get Rod out in the open. Rod starts to run off. All of a sudden, all these cops start to swarm. Rod ends up getting handcuffed and put into jail. I'm sorry, honestly, with how like Rod honestly is, I'm fine with this character being killed off. It's a little bit much. Plus, in this movie, we really don't have anybody trying to figure out anything during this film. It's just like, hey, everybody's gonna get killed, and that's what it is. Where once we get into the other Nightmare on Elm Street movies, we start to figure things out. We start to have people piecing things together, and there's much more of a strategy. We start to have a number of people all in the same dream. And so that's what I can like about other sequels compared to this original, where people are just like, hey, you're gonna die soon, and that's... There's more of like figuring things out, piecing things together. And I think that's what I can enjoy about the later films, rather than this original. No offense. Because, of course, eventually the movies later on have to get more complicated because sequels. So, but I enjoy this first attempt. There's a really cool thing that I almost forgot about here. So when Tina is sleeping the second time around, she has this dream, and before she ends up getting killed, where she's in her house and Freddy's starting to come after her. Tina. So Tina goes out and is to be on her street. All of a sudden we have this trash can that kind of rolls over, and so that's where Tina is to actually meet Freddy, and Freddy is to have these long stretched out arms coming after Tina, trying to grab onto her. And that's when also Freddy is to like chop off his fingers and is to kind of leave Tina with like, ugh. Kind of showing us that this character is basically unstoppable. We also have the one part where we have Nancy, who is to understand this character, and Freddy like weirdly just slices his own chest to have a bunch of these bugs that come out. Okay. All right. Weird visuals. Anyways, so to kind of, I guess, gross people out, I was like, interesting. Anyways, Rod is to go on to this thing called prison, jail, the caged area. And so now Nancy is to be the one dreaming of things. And she is to try to like come up with a strategy where like she's consistently trying to rein in Glenn. Just like, hey Glenn, like only have me sleep only a number of these hours and wake me up. Or only this girl is heavily drinking coffee, losing her mind. Her mother is just like, man, there's something wrong about this girl, and she needs to go and see somebody. She needs to go and see a dream doctor, a sleep doctor. We need to go and take her to that because oh my god. So Nancy goes to sleep one night, and she is starting to see what Freddy is doing in the dream world, like who he is technically going after next. So Nancy at one point is reining in Glenn to help her. And Glenn, of course, is a guy who is to fall asleep because it's not like this guy was prepared to stay awake. Like, hey, if you would have told him, like, hey, yeah, tomorrow, like, stay up at this, like, he probably would have been able to train himself or figure something out or give him a couple days in advance or whatever. So that way you could probably get killed in the meantime. It's life or death, Glenn. It's life or death. I don't know how many times Nancy was trying to rein anybody in to tell her, like, hey, like, just be here at this time. And they're like, sure, Nancy. Sure. I'm going to try to get this guy to my dream. Sure you will, Nancy. Sure you will. So Nancy goes on and sleeps, and the real thing she gets out of this dream while she's talking to Glenn in her dream, like, hey Glenn, you still awake? And all of a sudden Glenn appears out of the shadows and like, yeah. And then he fades back into the darkness. Nancy goes and sees that Krueger is going after Rod in this prison cell. So Nancy wakes up because of this, I think, alarm clock, and not because of Glenn, because Glenn is stupid. Couldn't wake her up. Couldn't stay up. Because Glenn, as well as a number of other people, just couldn't really believe Nancy because they don't experience these dreams, so they don't know what she's talking about. So they can't really tell the difference, and they don't give a because hey man, I'm not going to be dying soon, so I'm in the clear. So Nancy goes on to make her way to this police station where she's talking to this one overnight officer who was like, hey, the reason why I went on and did overnights was because I thought like nothing was ever really gonna happen. Well, they did. All of a sudden Lieutenant Thompson is there because I'm assuming he's always there. He sleeps in a cot back in the back somewhere. He's police station there 24 hours. So Nancy's telling them to go into the cell that Rod is because something's going to happen. And conveniently, by the time that they actually get to Rod's cell, that's when Rod is already to be sadly noosed by this sheet that he had, and he is to be killed. One, you would have thought for this bed that they would probably just have a mattress and that's it. Because that's probably in my mind what I would have naturally assume would only be on this bed. But that's probably just me. So, or maybe not a bed at all. We just have this like wooded thing that he would have to just sadly sleep on, some like little bench or something like that. So we find out Rod's dead. Everybody cries and then we go on and transition to Rod's funeral, and we have the priest who mentions is like, well, Rod, he lived by the sword and he dies by the sword. I'm like, he didn't get sliced by anybody. He didn't do himself in. Uh, what a very what a very horrific thing to kind of lead by for this character. But anyways, you would have thought maybe Rod would have like died by technically his own knife in his prison cell, but what they could have said, it's like, well, hey, wait a minute, like this blade wasn't even like we had this in evidence, like it was like in our papers, like, and we, but all of a sudden weirdly this knife just magically appeared in this guy's chest in his cell. Makes no sense. That would have made for a very interesting story to probably tell us that maybe that came from Rod's dream, to realize that we could start pulling stuff out of these dreams. That would have been an interesting kind of thing to do. But instead, so Nancy is starting to lose her flipping mind. So Thompson, or Lieutenant Thompson, is telling Marge, like, we need to go and do something with this girl. We need to figure something out to help her. And Marge is just like, well, I'm going to go and have her see a sleep doctor. Nancy goes and sees a sleep doctor, and we have Marge who's there the entire time. Yeah, I can completely understand trying to like help out her daughter, but anyways, we have Dr. King again, voice of Roger Rabbit, if I didn't say so before. We have Dr. King who's like, okay, like she's asleep, she's going through the whole process of everything. All of a sudden, this girl starts to have night terrors, and Dr. King's like, oh my god, all these things are off the chain. Oh my god, they're everywhere. Oh, I've never seen something like this before. Really? You haven't? Well, this is the first time. Marge goes in there, tries to scramble, and tries to wake her daughter up. All of a sudden, we now have Nancy, who's to pull out the Freddy Krueger hat out of her dream. She's like, aha! I figured it out. Figured out I can start pulling things out of this dream. So Nancy tries to desperately explain to her mother that this is Freddy Krueger, this is Freddy Krueger's hat. And so Nancy is trying to tell Marge to have that hat analyzed by Lieutenant Thompson. And Marge is like, no, I threw that hat away. Nancy's like, well, isn't that evidence clearly that there's something going on in my dream? How is it that all of a sudden I have this hat out of nowhere? So Marge desperately has to go on and tell Nancy, hey, come down to my basement weirdly. Because I'll explain everything to you. So Marge goes down to the basement with Nancy. And Marge explains, well, I'm going to tell you now the origin story of Freddy Krueger. Not a clear-cut origin story that I would have wanted, but one we get regardless. It's just... Marge explains that Freddy Krueger had killed 20 rando people, There was no reason for that killing, it was just random, I guess. So, Marge goes on. She explains to Nancy that Marge, as well as a number of other people, had decided to all go on and kill this man in a fire. And so there's no reasoning for Nancy to fret about Freddy Krueger anymore because he's dead. To the point where Marge has to pull out the glove with the knives on it, showcasing that this character is definitely dead. Why did she have that as a keepsake? Out of all the well, I guess that's got to be the most evidential. Like, you couldn't have just had the red and green sweater. That would have made a lot of sense. Uh, but, like, it's kind of weird for her to have held on to that glove. Um, you know what I would have liked a little bit better? Maybe this family would have been moving, and so Nancy would have stumbled upon this glove while they were moving into this house, and Marge would have been like, "Oh, like I have to explain this now, or otherwise my kids are gonna think that I'm a weirdo." And so that's how you go on, and you have the very first kid that is just starting to have these nightmares. More justifying things could have happened. But Marge is to drink herself to oblivion to kind of deal with the guilt of what she had done in her past. So, hence why she loses Lieutenant Thompson, who no longer wants to live with Nancy. So, we have eventually a cluster of really cool effects that I'm kind of quickly going and quickly ramming through at some points, as well as the rest of the story. So we have in some dream sequences some really cool things with this house's steps, where we kind of have Nancy who's desperately trying to walk up these steps, for all of a sudden to her to be like in this like goop that she keeps stepping in, and you could kind of tell, but hey, like I like this anyways, where we kind of have purposely this person who's walking up these steps right into this goopy thing, but like really thinking about it, when you're walking up these stairs, you're not really looking where you're going. So immediately you're probably going to step right into these goop things. And so, like, hey, give these people all the praise to immediately know where this girl is going to step regardless. Um, but it's a really cool effect either way. Uh, so we, of course, have Nancy that is to start dreaming, and at one point she is to dream at school. She dreams it, and I think like this is really early uh, in this movie, so forgive me. Nancy, of course, is to dream at school, and she is to fall asleep at school and dream about Tina, who is really just a body bag now, a person in a body bag that is being dragged off. Nancy goes and smashes her way into some hall monitor that, of course, is say like, "Hey, you need a hall pass," and Nancy's to run off. And so obviously this hall monitor is to actually be Freddy Krueger, kind of taunting Nancy as she makes her way to find where Tina's dragged body is. And so that's why Nancy goes on and uses the assistance of Glenn at some points to try and re-find Tina. So Nancy goes and looks for Tina in this boiler room, for her to go up against Freddy. So Tina goes on and burns her hand. And now we kind of get it for every single A Nightmare on Elm Street sequel. We, of course, have to have every single character burn themselves one way or another to wake themselves up in every single sequel that I've probably seen at some point. Like, I think one point there was like this tea kettle, I think, that somebody burned themselves on to wake themselves up. There is that, like, consistent story of things. Nancy wakes up with this burn mark on her hand. She's like, wow, like, so, like, this bruise really happened. So things are real from taking from this dream world. Nancy then goes on and is to try to use the help of Glenn, but then decides that this is all for naught because Glenn is going to start getting these nightmares. Nancy is to tell Glenn to show up at her house at exactly midnight, giving Nancy plenty of time to go on and get Freddy and pull him out of the dream world to then get him into what is reality, or this version of reality. Marge is to go on and bar up every single window and door in this house, which towards the end of this film is to just make it so Nancy can't get out of the house, but I guess neither can Freddy, when he, of course, is stuck in this house also. You know what? You would have probably thought at some point we would have gone on and had somebody kind of pull like the Jamie Lee Curtis, like Halloween 2018 thing, where all of a sudden we have like thinking that, like, the switcheroo, thinking that Jamie Lee Curtis has a safe house, but no, like that room that Jamie Lee Curtis was in was actually meant for Michael to be stuck in there. Spoilers for anybody that hasn't seen Halloween 2018. Reasonably, there's Halloween Kills out there now, and there's going to be a sequel to that, so people should probably have seen that by now. So, in my mind, I would think that there would be one of these, like, Nightmare on Elm Street kind of movies where you would have the same exact plan. Just go on and have, like, Freddy Krueger that's just kind of permanently locked up into this room until he eventually grows old and dies. That's a real possibility for this character. Like, hey, you're in reality now. You're just going to have to grow old and die. And that'll get you really dead. So, maybe we'll figure that out. Because, like, the Jeepers Creepers character came back. There's a third movie. Anyways, while Nancy is trying to figure out who can wake her at a certain XYZ time, Glenn is to go on and fall asleep over at his house because he's consistently dozing off while watching TV and at the same simultaneous time listening to music records. And his mom comes into his room and he's like, hey, why is it that you're doing both these things at the same time? And Glenn is just like, well, like, because I'm really just waiting for, like, Miss Nude America to come on. I'm just waiting for her. And so he tells his mom that, and his mom is just like, okay, all right. Well, she walks away after getting this explanation, and just... So, Glenn all of a sudden falls asleep again, and here's where he starts to get pulled into this mattress, and all this TV is being pulled in with him, and all of this stuff. So that's when we get the massive blood spray from out of this mattress. So we also had Nancy, who was calling Glenn's house, and Glenn's parents answer the phone, and they say that Nancy's saying that the phone call is really important. Glenn's father answers the phone and is like, I'm sorry, but Glenn is sleeping, so click. And he even takes the phone off the hook for them to go to sleep. And then Glenn dies. If I were Nancy, I probably would have came to this house and like, so, aren't you glad that I didn't get your son awake? That's what I would have said, because he was going to die. But anyways, so the guys are immediately thinking, or feeling, the guys are immediately realizing that these people don't need like a body bag. They need a freaking mop for this guy, because really all that's left is just juices with this guy. So it's like, well, that's one thing. So because of all of Nancy's friends dying, we just consistently have Nancy just staying at home to just kind of deal with this loss, as well as her just having her mother just forcibly wanting her to sleep. I don't care what you do, you're going to be sleeping. Then you're going to die. Nancy then goes on and she is to have a bath. And her mother is making warm milk. So, Nancy's to fall asleep in the tub. And we, of course, have that one iconic moment where you have the claws coming from the tub. Nancy continues to fall asleep in the tub. She ends up getting dragged into the tub. It's like, oh my god. Ah! She's drowning in the tub. She's desperately pleading for her mother. Mother comes in. Nancy realizes, oh, I just kind of fell in the tub. My bad, I'm sorry. So Nancy goes on. She goes on and she like eventually has to sleep. She has to, or otherwise, like you get it. I think in the remake with Kellen Lutz, where Kellen Lutz goes on and is talking with somebody and says that somebody has to sleep within 3 days, or you're just going to go insane. Really, like, that's not really true. Honestly, if you go on and if you haven't slept for 3 days, you're going to just start falling asleep everywhere. I would know, because I've gone on and done overnight jobs where I had stuff to do, like, during the day when I would normally sleep. So I would either like barely ever sleep or like I would just not sleep for a number of days to the point where I would just be falling asleep everywhere. And I mean everywhere. Very unhealthy, but when looking at it, I was never in dangerous situations where I was sleeping. A lot of times it'd just be like, I would be like in the car on the passenger side, just kind of, hey, all right. So just kind of dozing off a little bit. So anyways, going into this story, we have Nancy, who is to desperately tell her dad to try and be there at a specific time to wake her up. And Lieutenant Thompson is just like, sure, yeah, I'll be right there. It's not going to happen. So Nancy had gone on with Glenn at some point and was reading this book about all these booby traps. Because if she's like home aloneing it against Freddy Krueger, could you honestly just imagine like if Kevin McAllister went up against Freddy Krueger that would actually be a really interesting story. You could actually justify that, like, straight up because of what Nancy does in this film. If there only could have been like a Home Alone version of Freddy Krueger, that would have been hilarious. I desperately want that now, and somebody needs to make that some kind of fan made thing of Freddy Krueger versus Kevin McAllister. Oh, that would be great. A funny gag of something. So, Nancy, of course, is to have this watch that is to be like 10 minutes for her to take a nap. Which, I don't know how Nancy can wake up within 10 minutes of some kind of something. Like, for how she probably hasn't slept, I would naturally assume she would be power sleeping through anything. Just alarm goes off, fire alarm goes off, somebody slaps her in the face. Oh, I'll wake up then. Nancy goes on this dream and is trying to go after Freddy here. And she goes to this boiler room because, of course, she's trying to call Freddy out. Freddy's taking his sweet, sweet time because maybe he himself knows what's going on with Nancy. You would have thought at some point Freddy would have this knowledge of what's really going on, or what his characters have possibly figured out at some point. You would have thought possibly Freddy would come up with counters or figure out how to get the better of people, even in the real world, or reality, supposedly. So, Nancy then goes on and is to retain Freddy from her dream while going through a number of different places, a number of different rooms and avenues and whichever. Nose is very itchy. I don't know. Sorry. Anyway, like, why does he keep scratching at his nose? It's scratching. Anyways, I don't know why. It's something to do. Nancy is, of course, going through her own house, thinking that she's awake, all kinds of things. So, Nancy finally is to wake up, realizing, well, did I really get Freddy? Did I not get Freddy? Not quite sure. All of a sudden, Freddy is to be coming from behind her, in Nancy's bed, so they're wrestling, and so Nancy, Home Alone styling it, is to go through her house and use every trick that she is to have that she had gone through her house and is using against Freddy, again, as if this is like Home Alone. And the last thing that Nancy does is to douse Freddy in gasoline and light the torch. And now Nancy's scrambling up these steps, and Freddy is now being burnt going up these stairs. Nancy closes the basement and thinks like, oh, I've got it. I've got him. Nancy is calling for her father, that of course is at Glenn's house. Glenn starts running over. It's like, hey, what the is going on? They have to kind of bash through this door. And so they all go to the basement, realizing that Freddy's not there. Nancy all of a sudden realizes that there's flames upon the steps making it to her mother's room. They go to her mother's room. And so Krueger is fighting with Marge in her bed. I'm like, wait a minute. Was Marge? No. because I was thinking like Marge was downstairs on this couch just boozing it up, but then Nancy took Marge to her bed. I was like trying to put the pieces together. I'm like, wasn't she boozing it up downstairs, just blackout drunk, telling her daughter, it's like, hey, you better go on and sleep. Like, you're gonna die trying. Go to sleep. You. So Marge and Krueger are fighting it out in this bed. All of a sudden, we have Lieutenant Thompson that's tossing his blanket over Freddy Krueger's burning corpse, burning body. Thompson takes the blanket back off. All of a sudden, we just see Marge's body sucked through this bed. Weird, goofy visual, I know. And so Thompson is like, I don't know what I just saw, but I saw something weird. Because a lot of the other like deputies are like, what's going on, Lieutenant? And he's like, I don't know. Nancy's still in the room. She backs away. Freddy's behind her in the sheets. He's kind of getting ready for some sheet action. Freddy Krueger tears through the sheets. He's making his way closer and closer to Nancy. Nancy's like, I know that you're there. Like, I could tell that you're there. So Nancy decides to kind of like to be with Freddy here. And so Nancy, instead of killing this character off, she instead makes a bargain with him. A bargain to say, like, hey, bring all of my friends back. And because you have lost your power, like, and I'm just like, okay, this is just a weird, goofy conclusion to this film. And so Freddy all of a sudden is to weaken and to electrically fade away. It's a weird film. So Nancy is to go on, and I guess she is to have awakened from this weird, goofy dream. And Marge is there. All of Nancy's friends are there. Because they're alive? Alive? Where? So Marge is complimenting Nancy for how like peakish she is and all this jazz. So Nancy sees all of her friends in this car, and so she's like, oh, okay, I guess I'll go to school today because all my friends are alive and my mother's happy and not boozing it up anywhere. And so Nancy goes into this car. All of a sudden, this car is controlling itself and has this hood that is to be red and green. And we're thinking, oh no, like all these kids are going to get killed off. And then we see them driving off without these guys having the ability to control this car. And then we just see Marge, who ends up getting sucked through this door window, and she ends up getting killed. And that's how the movie just ends. I'm like, I don't really understand this movie. But, like, really we can draw the conclusion that possibly Nancy, that this might have been another dream and Freddy's just continuing to go after her anyways. We could draw a bajillion conclusions about like, oh no, like Nancy was to go on and die. Cause I don't really like, I haven't seen the sequel of this, so maybe they might have somehow explained the ending of this film. I don't know. This movie is interesting, but there's a lot of things where I'm just like, so what now? Who did the what now? Hey? Dream world? Real world? Does Freddy have power in the real world? Where he can just start killing off people? He can bring them back to life just to kill them? I'm exhausted. I'm exhausted from trying to figure all this out, put pieces together that probably don't exist. So with that said, I'm gonna leave this what it is. Even though I say it's a great film, I have problems with it. It's like so. Really, this could be an even better film if I didn't have like complete problems about it, or just like who did the what now. And I know there's probably somebody who's like, well, hey man, you should have went to some other video that thoroughly explains this film and you could probably understood a lot more. Really, it's all into everyone's interpretation and so on and so forth. So, really, I would have that conclusion that I'm assuming Nancy is still going to get killed in the dream world because Krueger was to be defeated in the real world. Some goofy nonsense. And so Freddy went right back to the dream world, and that's how I can conveniently end this story for this film. I'm gonna get out of here before I start rattling on and still not figure this movie out, but it is what it is. So, with that said, this movie's odd. It's an odd movie that gets odder through sequels, through franchise, through a number of things that doesn't really need to get understood. Just you need to enjoy the ride, and I can't do that with this film or this franchise or this thing. Um, but I think in sequels, there's a going about things compared to this first run of things. Um, so with that said, I'm gonna get out of here. Bye, buddy. Bye, buddy.